independent feature film with my brother. And this was in 2007, 2008, when it was the dawn of the prosumer video camera. And so everybody had a feature film, and it was the collapsing of the housing market. And so no one had any money. And so we decided to self-distribute. And in college, we made this the year I graduated college. But in college, I was #1 in the world at a video game called Age of Mythology. Age of Mythology is a real-time strategy game, very similar to a Warcraft, very dissimilar to a Fortnite. But essentially, he looked at me and said, "Hey, you're really good with computers," because I was #1 in the world at a video game. Can you figure out this social media thing? And, that was interesting to me. I always like to figure out how systems work and how you can do well within a system. And so I locked myself in a New York City basement for about 10 months and learned everything I could about building audiences on social media. That included YouTube. And so when it came time to release the film, we had a very huge MySpace page, first and foremost. We had an email list of about 250,000 emails, and this was back 2008, 2009, something like that. And a large Facebook page. We were the third result on Twitter if you searched for film. We just had a large social presence for the time. And so we ended up doing very, very well. We sold about 50,000 DVDs. We premiered #1 on Hulu, and we're #1 on Hulu for like 6 months for films. And then we got a licensing deal through Netflix and had that renewed multiple times, did very well on Amazon and iTunes. But what this process, along with taking quite a few kind of indie film gigs and commercial gigs in New York City to pay the bills while we were working on this film, it made me realize I was not a huge fan of production. But I loved building audiences. And so that led to me getting a job at a company called Driver Digital. I was employee #1, was there for about 3.5 years, built them up to around 20 some odd employees. We were doing about 120 million annual video views on YouTube. And they decided they wanted to go towards more of an OTT play. OTT was definitely not ready, 8 years ago now. I still don't think it's quite there. It's probably approaching that point, at least for the bigger brands where you can make, very, very significant revenue. I know I'm at a conference literally called OTT.X. So I'll withhold some of my more fringe opinions on OTT. But essentially, it was not the time then. And so I went to a company called Frederator. They traditionally made cartoons for TV, including Wow Wow Wubsy, My Life as a Teenage Robot, probably most notably Adventure Time and Fairly Odd Parents. And they just gotten a big chunk of money from YouTube Originals to make TV-style cartoons for YouTube. They brought me on to run audience development. We built that Originals channel into the second fastest growing channel, second only to Vice, out of that Originals program. And within 6 months, we were at like 500,000 subscribers. During that time, we also launched the Channel Frederator Network, which we built into a network of around 3,000 animation channels by the time I had left, doing about 6 billion annual video views, all on the promise of like, hey, look how we built Cartoon Hangover, which was the Originals channel. We can help you do that. And when we were small, we were able to do that. But as we grew past about 100 channels or so, we realized it was very difficult for us to work very closely with a lot of people on our network. But what we found was when we promoted them from Cartoon Hangover, we would change people's lives overnight. Right? They would get, hundreds of thousands, millions of views, right? And they could, become full-time YouTubers, start building small media companies, et cetera. The problem was that the audience on Cartoon Hangover wasn't all that into it. Right. So like we would have a significant percentage, right, because the audience was huge, but there was a larger percentage that didn't like it. And so we set out to build some owned and operated properties built around the idea of promoting our network. And we took Channel Frederator, which had about 50,000 subscribers, maybe 100,000 monthly views, hadn't had a video uploaded to it in 2 or 3 years. This is a very long elevator ride.
You said it, not me.
Yeah. So we started programming that, and we built that channel into 1 million subs in the span of 13 months, doing 20 million monthly video views. We probably sent anywhere between 50 to 100 million views to our network. We built that through a lot of original programming. So we definitely utilized a lot of content from our network and built programs around that, but we also had original series like 107 Facts, which is exactly as it sounds. It was a video, 107 Facts about your favorite cartoons. We had Cartoon Conspiracy, which was another show that my team and I developed. And in the animation space, the conspiracies are rife, and there's a million of them. Everything from is The Simpsons and Family Guy in the same universe to was the Great Mushroom War on Adventure Time from Earth, and so on and so forth. And so during that time, our general branding mission was to become known as the best online video programmers in the world, basically the people best at building audiences, because one of the things that my boss at the time, Fred Seibert, wanted to do was essentially go beyond animation, right? He wanted to take another shot at a business he had previously sold to YouTube called Next New Networks, where basically it was a series of different verticalized networks. And so part of that approach was to just become known as the best in the world at building online audiences. And so I would write these research papers, things like, when is the best time to post your videos, the definitive guide to making YouTube thumbnails, what is watch time, which is kind of the key metric or set of metrics really that YouTube focuses on. That led to being asked to be on panels and give presentations at conferences like Social Media Week and Vid Summit and, VidCon multiple times, which 4 years ago allowed me to start my agency, Little Monster. To date, we've helped our clients generate somewhere in the neighborhood of 40 billion additional video views. Some of our biggest successes was taking a channel called Pencilmation from about 10 million to 400 million video views, mostly in the kind of the kids space. And then we took movie clips from 150 million monthly views up to over 1 billion monthly views. They're regularly in the top 10. And that was a lot of consultation and training around how YouTube works and how you can optimize your content to be received by audiences on YouTube.
Very great. Well, thank you. It was it was a crowded elevator, so it was perfect. And talking about VidCon, it's funny because VidCon typically has packs of teams chasing around YouTubers, but the YouTubers are typically chasing around Matt. So to get information on the latest thumbnail. And for those of you who don't know me, I'm Mark Rashba. I guess I have to speak to the stuff behind me. Came out of the music business, but had spent about 16 years at Sony Pictures, helping them and do a lot of digital partnerships, and launched My Business Movie Method a couple of years ago, helping drive digital distribution partnerships for content owners and platforms. So we did a lot with working with partners like Matt to help grow commercial YouTube channels for a lot of folks. So thanks for the intro. That was great. And welcome everybody. As a reminder for the participants, please just post your questions in the chat so we can kind of make this a little bit more of a dialogue to a degree where we can intersperse your questions in there along with the stuff that we have. But definitely take notes because, like I said, Matt's an expert. He already just gave us a little bit of a tidbit in there about how YouTube sort of gauges everything. So, and I thought I knew YouTube too until, working many years in marketing, but I did not know nearly as much as these guys do. And certainly what's happening today with OTT is YouTube's becoming something a lot more commercial than people realize, certainly for brands. The YouTubers have figured it out years ago, but brands have really just been coming around probably a lot more in the last few years, not as long as the YouTubers themselves. So now, why don't we level set everybody, because a lot of the talk has always been about, last couple of, let's call it 6 months, about Disney Plus and Apple TV and Netflix. And, look, Disney Plus, I think, just announced 65 million global subscribers. And but talk about YouTube, what is that universe like, and help level set for people that, how big it is compared to those other guys that are getting all the news.
Yeah, the scale of YouTube is really, really difficult to wrap your mind around, right? we hear 65 million subscribers to Disney Plus and we're blown away, right? 180 some odd, whatever, to Netflix, right? And you're like, oh my God, right? You can kind of put that into like a frame of reference. YouTube has 2 billion logged in users every month, right? And those are just the people that are logged in, right? It reaches like 98% of the US. The amount of time spent in a single session on average is 40 minutes. The average person has multiple sessions per day, right? Now to TV numbers in terms of watch time, right? Like TV, you're probably still averaging what, 4.5, 5 hours, in a given day. That's a lot, right? But when we talk like digital, the scale of what that means from a viewership perspective, you're talking about trillions of views in a given month across billions and billions of people, right? And so like to compare that to a Netflix, right? I think the last time they put out comparable numbers, it was something like the amount of watch time on Netflix in a given month was like 100 million hours watched. Right? Like YouTube is in the billions. It's night and day from like a scale perspective. So, from that perspective, like if your audience is human beings, they are on YouTube, right? And you can find them and you can get your content in front of them.
So, you talked about YouTube content for a second there, but you think, is YouTube a little bit more like impulse or discovery? Or is it sort of like the lean back kind of traditional linear type of TV consumer that you think's going on the platform?
Yeah, well, YouTube can be whatever the viewer wants it to be, right? Which is, I think, pretty amazing. If you want to find a chicken recipe, right, for dinner tonight, you can find that, right? If you want to throw something on and lean back and watch for 10, 15, 30 minutes, you can do that. If you want to get caught up on sports highlights back when we got to play sports, you could do that. If you wanted to watch, the top content or the top clips from the previous night's late night shows, you can watch that. And now you can even watch straight streaming TV from YouTube, right? So pretty much any experience you want to have is completely available on YouTube, right? And in terms of like lean back or engage, both audiences are there. That said, on average, the vast majority of viewers on YouTube are passive, non-engaging viewers, right? Like, it'll vary by video and type of video and demographic, but largely we're talking about no more than 20% of your viewers will engage with a video. And more often than not, it's in the single digits of like whether they're commenting, liking, or subscribing. So the vast majority of viewers actually use it much more as a lean back experience as opposed to an engaging experience, though from a social standpoint, there's still plenty of functionality there and plenty of people who are engaging on YouTube in that way.
It's funny, just to speak to that a little bit, going into the coronavirus period, a lot of people discovered they had YouTube already wired into their home if you had a Fire TV, or a lot of the platforms carry it. Yeah. And I think maybe Andrew Lloyd Webber set it up that they created this event every weekend. I don't even know if it's still happening, but for the first number of weekends around the globe, putting up old library version of one of the performances of one of his shows. And it was highly engaging, and it was a very different experience because, one, you had co-viewing. It wasn't singular viewing on a mobile device. And of course, you had a lot of co-viewing of people using it in their potential living room or bedroom use of a big television. So I wonder, I don't know if you know this, but I imagine post-COVID or in the world to come, we may see more engagement happening with destination TV events happening on YouTube now that people are way more technically savvy now than they were probably just 6 months ago. I think that's right.
Absolutely. We definitely saw this with a number of different celebrities embracing the platform during COVID. We have a bit of a report coming out around that, hopefully in the near future here, as well as more general trends across traditional media and how they started to change the way they engage with the platform during all this. You mentioned that Andrew Lloyd Webber event, Josh Gad's doing the same thing with the table reads, right? Those could very easily run on TV and have commercials spliced into them if that was a potential option, right? We saw Viacom pick up Krasinski's show, right? Was it Now for Some Good News, or just Some Good News?
Some good news,
Some good
SGN.
news. Yeah.
And you're talking about the Josh Gad reunions that he did with a lot of the cast from big movies.
Yeah. Now, I mean, the moment they put that on TV, right, your budget goes from like, yeah, this is a fun way to, kill a couple of hours, right, to like, no, pay me, right? Which fair, right? Like dollar wise, YouTube from like a pure like viewership perspective, like a view to view, right? It can't compare, right? Because you're talking about like one ad, maybe a couple of ads per video, whereas like in an hour of television, you're talking like 30, 40 ads, right? Maybe more. And so like the CPMs might be similar, but the volume of ads on linear would be much higher. But there's no reason why that couldn't be a phenomenal, streaming platform show, right? It certainly picked up the viewership, right? It had amazing viewership. The opportunities there to do interesting stuff. One of the things I thought you were going to mention, which I found absolutely fascinating about that, is like the problem with just on-demand video in general, right? Like you look at Netflix drops a new season, right? And everybody talks about it for like 5 days, right? And then everyone kind of forgets about it, right? Now there's some Netflix social media person who's like, well, we see, conversation go on all year. And it's like, okay, right? Like no one's coming after your job, right? Like, but like everyone talks about it for like 5 days and no one talks about it after that, basically, until it starts coming out again, right? And so from that perspective, it makes on-demand more difficult from like a sustaining standpoint, right? Because it's like, how do you create the urgency in a viewer when the video is just always going to be there, right? And so there are definitely marketing tactics that go around it, right? Like the way you title a video and making sure that it's in the, active voice or present tense as opposed to the past, right? Because like, oh, if it already happened, what does it matter, right? Versus if it's happening now, well, there's a greater sense of urgency. But in the particular example you gave, right, the fact that they were taken down after 24 hours was fascinating to me because other people have tried similar tactics to create that urgency,
right?
But have failed and kind of abandoned it because on YouTube, like one of the great things about YouTube compared to the other kind of video platforms out there is that there's tremendous potential in the long tail because YouTube's always trying to satisfy viewers, right? And YouTube also knows that lots of audiences like to rewatch things, that audiences might stop in the middle of a video for any number of 1,000 reasons and forget about the video until they come back again and are like, oh yeah, I want to finish that, right? And so from that perspective, that became really interesting because it created that real sense of urgency in the viewer that if they didn't watch it then, it was not going to be there, which can drive just unbelievable viewership because you create such a incredible view velocity, which on YouTube and for pretty much any really like recommendation algorithm, if you have tremendous velocity where everything is flooding to this one point, they're going to begin recommending that to more and more people throughout the platform in real time because their machines just operate in real time, basically. Like that's how
off-brand for them? Is that off-brand in a way for YouTube to have live events that evaporate? Because typically YouTube, you do think of it as a resource and a place you can always go to get that content.
Yeah.
So is that a change?
No, I think YouTube as a platform understands at this point that they are a library, right? And so they want to have something for everyone, right? No matter what it is you're looking for. And if this is a way to utilize the platform that obviously doesn't violate any sort of like terms of service or community guidelines or anything, they want to encourage it, right? They want to encourage creators to be experimental, to try new things, to see what excites the audience.
Interesting. So, tell me a little bit, do you think most of the viewing that's happening today as we speak on YouTube, is it single viewing or do you see co-viewing now starting to play a bigger role? Because when we watch content in a household, linear or VOD, whether it's subscription or advertising supported, typically there'll be a co-viewing experience in a household, especially in COVID. But Is YouTube sort of changing, or is it still really focused on a singular user?
Well, it is focused on the singular user, the person making the choice about the video. Given the vast number of various nursery rhymes that I can now sing by heart, I will tell you there is lots of co-viewing happening from personal experience, at least. But no, it's about the person making the decision about which video to watch. That is who they are catering to in terms of the recommendations they make on what to watch next.
So, in the spirit of it being both a from a Saturday Night Live skit, the dessert topping, or is it a floor waxer? YouTube is both a channel and, you can't deny it's a social platform. And it sounds like in the social platform, you get something you don't get on a lot of the other channels, like a Netflix or platforms like a Netflix, which is sort of this fan communities, or this fact that you're not kind of alone, right? So can you talk a little bit about how YouTube provides that benefit of you being able to sort of exploit these great fan communities and audience communities?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there are quite a number of ways from a commercial perspective. But before jumping into that, that's how YouTube started, right? YouTube started as a bunch of people who felt like they didn't fit in where they lived and just wanted to talk to other people like them. And the only way they could do that would be to upload videos of themselves, talking, in their bedrooms, usually, to the camera, giving their opinion on a thing, and then people would respond back in comments, or way back in the day, in video responses, right? And so that's where it came from, and that spirit still very much exists today, in terms of kind of communities developing around people. I think Hank and John Green are great examples of a lot of things, not the least of which is how to build just a really wonderful and positive community on YouTube, which generally isn't par for the course. You have to work to do something like that, because they can definitely deteriorate, right? In terms of the bad elements of a community can kind of poison the well. In terms of from a commercial perspective, most of the developments around that have developed over the last couple of years here, right? So there are merch shelves that you can run underneath videos, primarily t-shirts. And then in addition to that, for the more traditional players, both video games and television and film, you can do, point of contact sale right there, right? If you make a video about the Avengers, there'll be a little thing that pops up next to it that says, buy the Avengers now from YouTube, right? Or rent it here for XYZ. And I believe, if I'm not mistaken, they now have a functionality to allow people to buy tickets. Not that many people are buying movie tickets, but if you're watching a trailer for an upcoming film, there is a way to integrate directly into, I believe it's Fandango, to buy tickets right there. And then, of course, from an in-video perspective, it's the best marketing you can do in the world right now, right? Is having direct call to action to the audience within a video, right? It has the highest amount of recall, has the highest amount of follow through, far better than any sort of display ad or static display ad. Certainly influencer marketing in the vein and the like, when done correctly, can have a huge impact as well. But from a commercial standpoint, it's incredibly valuable. And then just from a tool standpoint, I would say YouTube as a social network lags behind other more well-known social networks. But the advent of the community tab has been very helpful in terms of staying in touch with your audience and being able to interact with your audience in a more direct way. And then on top of that, they created a stories product as well that runs on people's home feeds that I see a lot of creators using.
So let's pivot a little bit, because what I remember from sort of the studio experience is a lot of marketing departments and digital marketing specifically would just use this as another platform to market, right?
Mhm.
But I would argue, based on what we've been talking about, that they may be underutilizing YouTube, because I think what happens is everyone just assumes, from a studio perspective and a network perspective, oh, we just have all people love all movies, and they would just normally use it as, I call it the sort of the part of the proverbial conveyor belt. So can you be a little like prescriptive and talk about what would be a better way for people, knowing that this platform has all those benefits you just shared with us?
Mhm.
What sort of the things that like the networks and studios, generally speaking, or content owners need to do better on the platform?
Yeah. Well, is this session going for several hours, Mark? And
Yeah,
do you
but
want
you
to
can
go take a
highlight,
nap?
because I
'Cause-
just knew that a lot of
yeah.
targeting goes right after the same. There was this general idea that this fan, or a fan, or just even a moviegoer of a romantic comedy, may also, just because they fit a certain demographic, oh well, they're also going to like horror. Oh, and they're probably a mom, so maybe they're going to also like it. And I think what happened was just everything on YouTube became blended together. It's like all run using more of a studio or network lens, rather than thinking about it from the actual user of YouTube and the platform. So what like are the things that we've seen many successes out there with a lot of the the fun trailer videos. We've seen spoiler listicles, things like that. So where would you suggest these guys now going forward in the new future post COVID, like where do they have to start thinking about it now that there's a different relationship with the user and the consumer?
Yeah, so I think you want to think about it from a interest standpoint, and the way we look at a YouTube channel is it's far more similar to, let me see, Netflix than it is to NBC, right? Where if you think about your YouTube channel as a Netflix show page, you're going to be far better served than if you think about your channel as like a network channel, right? And the main reason being is that people will subscribe to a YouTube channel or watch a single show, and there will be a percentage of them that will be interested in similar things, right? But there's going to be a larger percentage that are not, right? So let's talk about the Netflix show page first, right? If you're watching The Office US on Netflix and you're binge watching, right? And they show an episode, they just at the end of one episode of Office US, they show Office UK episode, right? There's going to be a certain percentage that are like, all right, Ricky Gervais is pretty awesome. I'll let it run, right? Maybe 40%, 30%, right? There's going to be about 60 or 70% that are like, what the hell? Right? Like, I want to go back to Michael Scott from, Scranton, and we'll click away and try to find back US Office, right? Now imagine if instead of The Office UK, right, they did an episode of Brooklyn Nine-Nine, right? Or they did an episode of American Horror Story, right? You're talking about a small sliver of that audience, right? So the way that ends up working on YouTube is when you upload a video, that video is going to get the majority of its impressions by and large in the first 48 hours. At the very least, those first 48 hours are going to have a significant impact on that video's lifespan on the platform, right? So if you're, the Parks and Rec YouTube channel, and you've been uploading clips of Park and Rec, and you've built a massive audience of, one of the greatest comedies of all time for Parks and Rec, and then you decide in your infinite wisdom that you are going to upload a video of a clip from American Horror Story, right? That video is going to get a fraction of the viewership that your clips will. Right? But that's not the actual damage, because what happened was that American Horror Story video was actually served to a huge number of your audience, and they just decided not to click on that, right? And like any recommendation algorithm, YouTube is going to take all of that data and filter it back into the system and say, these viewers are now less likely to click on future uploads from this Parks and Rec channel. Let's not serve them nearly as much Parks and Rec videos from that channel in the future, because they've shown they're not interested in it. The recommendation algorithms aren't smart enough yet, at least on YouTube, to understand there can be multiple different interest groups within a channel and serve those interest groups specifically at that level. They just see widget coming from a channel and then rate the widgets, right? And your engagement with those widgets. And so that can have a negative immediate impact because that American Horror Story video is going to take impressions away from your Parks and Rec videos, and it can have a long-term damaging impact, right? Where you end up having a segmented audience, right? Where you have some people there for American Horror Story, you've got some people there for Parks and Rec, you've got some people for Brooklyn Nine-Nine, you've got some people for Law and Order, right? And none of those audiences are served enough by your channel to be regularly served your videos. And so your channel ends up going into what we call a death spiral, where YouTube just serves your videos to less and less of your audience, because for the people that were there for Law and Order, right, they've gotten served so many American Horror Story videos and so many Parks and Rec videos that they haven't clicked on them, that YouTube doesn't even serve them your American Horror Story videos anymore, your Law and Order videos anymore, because they've opted out of watching so many of your previous videos, which means that you end up hurting your audience even for the biggest IP on that channel, because of all the other uploads that have gone up, right? So from a general perspective, you want to super serve an audience. Now, that said, you can create great kind of thematic hub channels, right? If you're keeping that programming very core, like you have just a whole bunch of comedies or a whole bunch of horror movie type content. Now that's doable, and you can make that work, right? And that's worked time and time again. It's not ideal, but it can do it, and it can absolutely work when a single IP doesn't have enough content to carry a YouTube channel for 52, 104, right, 156 uploads in a given year, because YouTube doesn't stop. Right? Internet doesn't stop. You have to constantly kind of feed that beast. And so for an individual IP, it has to have a good volume of content. And
then
there's
Matt,
a way around
in
that.
the content space, just to make sure everyone's sort of clear, you're talking clip content and or episodic that ultimately starts to generate revenue, because what you just talked about, that death spiral, it sounds pretty draconian, but sounds like you could really mess up your strategy around how to commercialize your IP with YouTube if you don't know what you're doing out of the gate. So it can be any of that kind of content, and you really do need to sort of launch, it sounds like, the right way.
Absolutely. Launching the right way is definitely important. You can always recover, and adjust your strategy down the road. So like, if you stumble out of the gate, you can't get growth, right? You've got some growth, but it's not up to the level that you believe the content would be. Like, it's recoverable, right? You're never going to be at a point where you can't build an audience if you're approaching YouTube kind of in the correct way. Now, that said, the best place to be, and it does require a production budget and investment, is to have people subscribe to a channel for a particular format or style of video, right? And so we did a huge project called the Taxonomy of YouTube Videos, where basically we broke down what the underlying formats are on the vast, vast majority of successful YouTube channels, so that you could have essentially guardrails for how to develop content that's going to work well on YouTube. And kind of the best case scenario, if you are a smaller IP or a thematic channel, is that you have shows that act as wrappers for that IP, right? In the sense of like, if you look at a Watch Mojo, right, it's like top 10 list, right? That's like a very basic format, just a listicle, right? There's no reason why listicles can't work that are wrappers for like big IP. Like if you had a large reality TV library, right, you could do, 10 most painful moments in reality TV history, right? And then you just pull a whole bunch of the most painful moments from the various reality IPs that you own or manage, right? You could do cast members react to their cringiest moments, right? And you string together a whole bunch of cringy moments from one particular character on your reality TV show, right? And you have them react to that, right? Or you have the people that were on with them react to that and relive that, right? You have strangers react to that. Like there's so many options that you can kind of utilize that IP and put it into formats that are recurring formats that will allow you to continue to make content even in the event that you have a limited supply of that content, and it helps you retain the value of that primary content in the sense of if you don't want to run full episodes, if you're worried about clips devaluing the property or something like that, right? This can still act as a marketing vehicle, and to your point, also a commercial vehicle, because you can definitely generate significant revenue off of content like that, and not necessarily insignificant revenue either. Talking about hundreds of thousands of dollars a month in potential revenue off of not even that many views, right? 20, 30, 40 million monthly views can easily generate 100,000 in revenue, if not more, on YouTube. Again, if you know kind of the right structure of videos and how the overall system works on YouTube, both from a viewership and a monetization perspective.
Right. And just to speak to that, just because I know from certain experiences around town, so to speak, you're going to find this interesting dichotomy that you're going to have a marketing department that's just trying to service engagement and drive people to watch the full episodes wherever they may be licensed, subscription, or otherwise. And then you kind of have a commercial team that says, wait a minute, we can make revenue off of this. And they're typically not under the same sort of pocket or umbrella. But there are a couple of people that I've seen that are kind of pulling that together where they're able to monetize more effectively around IPs that they're normally just using as promotional. And it's not even first run stuff. A lot of it's library, like you said.
Yeah, absolutely. Then it's a powerful combination, right? Like covering the costs and then some of the marketing to drive to a show that's in active production, increase that viewership is incredibly powerful. And, you're reaching a huge volume of the U.S. audience, potentially new audiences that, maybe they're not the biggest linear TV viewers, but they happen to catch a clip of, the 10 cringiest moments and they're like, wow, now I got to watch this show.
Right. And you spoke to it a little bit, but one of my favorite things you shared with me is that from a marketing point of view, we used to look at everything around fan engagement around concentric circles. So the center flat concentric circle was the ultimate fan and the core. And then the outer circle was people that were sort of moderate fans. And then you had kind of everybody else with this big net. But you were talking about these three-dimensional like bubbles, like YouTube finds all these interesting things through the algorithms and through the process that you may, in fact, be able to spin off and find something you weren't even intending to find. And the data and the mass numbers lead the way. You want to talk to that a little bit? Because I always found that fascinating.
Yeah. So the way YouTube makes recommendations is kind of twofold. One, to the individual, it's based on your watch history. They basically take a grab bag of your past watches on YouTube, and then from there make recommendations as to content that's also come out from that channel or content that's similar to that. The other way that they do it is through what is referred to as collaborative filtering. Right. So if Allison and Becky both really love David Dobrik, there's a good chance that Celeste, who has very, very similar watch histories to both Allison and Becky, is going to get recommended that David Dobrik video. Right. Whether or not she's ever watched a David Dobrik video before. And that's how you get into those kind of like three-dimensional spheres of audience, where it has far less to do with the demographic information of the viewer in terms of like age or gender, and far more to do with what they've actually expressed as their interests through their eyeballs, basically. What videos do they click on? Which videos do they not click on? How long do they spend on the videos that they did click on? And did they engage with that video at all? Next time they came back to YouTube, did they decide to start their session with that user's videos? And so it's a phenomenal engine of audience discovery, where there'll be lots of audiences going to a channel or a new channel that is engaging with their current audience, because the way YouTube expands your audience for you without you having to spend a dime on like paid or anything is by trying to find the next video that someone's going to love or discover, right? And so the the value in entertaining the audience that you currently have on YouTube beyond the monetary components of it is that if you're able to do that successfully, YouTube will look at that and say, well, what other viewers like this with similar watch histories can we recommend these videos to and expand this channel's audience?
Which is great. And what I love about it too is that you, the content owner, control your destiny. It's not begging a network or a subscription service to put you up above the fold, or let me get up in the flow case, or please promote me in an email. You control it. But let's take a break. I did ask for questions. We got a few, so I want to kind of just see, Matt, if you don't mind sort of addressing this. The first one was really for content producers and providers. YouTube's typically been used to drive awareness and engagement for content that lives on non-YouTube platforms, right? Was that the same sort of for monetizing content that's on YouTube itself? So in other words, I think what we're asking, non-YouTube platforms, the ones we were talking about before, can you bring that stuff into YouTube and monetize that as well?
Yeah, you can definitely do that. In regards to the best value, I think it's both, right? Like I think you don't have to give explicit calls to action or make like your only call to action or the only valuable thing that comes out of having a YouTube audience that they go to a higher value platform or make a purchase action, right? Like there's tons of value in just someone discovering a video and watching a few more based on what we just discussed in terms of like YouTube's going to use that data and filter it into their next set of recommendations for the next person, the next person, the next person that comes. So if I absolutely had to choose, then it's from a pure revenue standpoint, it's driving people off of YouTube, right? Like YouTube just cannot compete from a dollar perspective yet, right? That said, there's not a ton of people that can, just walk into Netflix and be like, hey, I would like you to buy a show from me, right? Now, maybe Netflix is the wrong example because they bought some shows, some questionable choices. It's a walled garden, right? You have to your point, you have to have their permission, and anyone can create a YouTube channel. Now, that doesn't necessarily help IP holders, right? You're still looking for a licensing deal, right? You're still trying to get revenue, but like if you have IP, you can take a singular strategy and get both results out of it, right? Because if you're generating tens of millions of monthly views on, clips, on compilations, on, shows that we refer to as vessel shows about your content, right? That's going to drive interest in watching your show in full on the platform that they're actually on. And so from that perspective, like we look at YouTube as the top of an audience funnel, right? And whether that audience goes on to, buy tickets to see you live, to buy t-shirts, to buy, plushies, to, watch the content on a streaming platform, to purchase the content outright, that's just messaging, right? The thing that we focus on is how do we build the top of that funnel as large as possible so that those marketing and messaging initiatives have the widest reach as possible.
Interesting. And also, it's almost like a PSA question. What's going on, and Alex asked, and Alex, I met him at our lunch conversation today, but what's going on with YouTube with respect to kids content? There were some changes at the beginning of the year. We understand that CPMs are down as a result. Can you just give a quick snapshot why that's a little bit more challenging now than it had been just a year ago?
Yeah, so, almost a year ago to the day, YouTube and the FCC announced the COPPA decision, right, which basically changed a lot of the way in which YouTube serviced the kids' audience that's on the platform, right? Before it came down, YouTube refused to even publicly, at least, acknowledge that kids watch the content, which is hilarious. But essentially, the outcome of that was more disclosure on the creator side, like this was made for kids, that sort of stuff. And on the advertising side, what it meant was you couldn't really do contextual targeting, right? So there's no remarketing, this is no like age group targeting, that sort of thing, right? You can still do channel specific targeting, you can still do keyword specific targeting, but from like a dollars and cents standpoint, that keyword targeting and specific placement targeting is really only somewhere in the neighborhood of about 20% of the advertising on YouTube. The vast majority of it was the contextual that you can no longer do in kids. So that caused CPMs to drop by somewhere between 50 and 70%, depending on the channel, right? And this was in January. Following up on that was the double whammy of COVID. When COVID hit and advertisers began pulling out, right? And so where we are now is basically what I believe to be the lowest point for CPMs that the children's space will ever see, barring that they just decide to stop advertising altogether. So there's still plenty of advertising running against kids content, primarily on YouTube proper. I don't believe they've monetized the kids app yet, though I would be surprised if that wasn't in the works, right?
That's
Google, yeah, well, Google has something like 50,000 salespeople, right? And they have trillions of impressions available in the kid space that is going unmonetized. And so I think it stands to reason that it is a huge initiative for them in figuring out, okay, how do we package this? How do we sell this to get more advertising, kid-safe advertising into these areas, because it is such an unexploited area, right? Like, yeah, YouTube got fined 175 million. It sounds like a big number, but you do the math and it's actually something like a day and a half of revenue for them. It's a day and a half.
That's nothing. Interesting.
But the impact, though, is they probably lost, many multiples of that in terms of not being able to serve those ads anymore, which they shouldn't have been in the first place. But regardless, it just is a huge opportunity that I imagine they're certainly putting significant resources into, which is why I am very, very bullish on the kid space long term, especially on the kid space in terms of CPMs. Now, last note on this, I'm nothing if not long-winded when it comes to YouTube. Is that the impact of COPPA and of COVID means that there is a smaller number of people creating content in that space right now, right? It's just not economically viable for many, many, many different people, which means that if you're a speculator, now might be a great time to put some skin in the game in this space, as there's somewhat less competition.
So does that mean Ryan, his unboxing, he's going to go down from 100 million to 50 million?
No, the side impact of all the decisions around COPPA was that the rich got a hell of a lot richer, because part of it was like they weren't going to let any content be shown to kids as much as they could help it if it hadn't been human reviewed, right? And so the stuff that got human reviewed was the people who've been uploading to the platform for a long time that made, brand safe content, right? And so when all these like smaller actors, many bad actors within that, but many good actors within that too, not only saw a massive CPM dip, but saw their viewership get crushed because YouTube just hadn't gotten around to reviewing their content, right? Like when you talk about the scale of YouTube, 500 hours of content are uploaded every minute. That is just such an, I did the calculation a few months ago, and it was something like every hour on YouTube would take, every hour of content uploaded on YouTube, or within an hour, the amount of content uploaded on YouTube would take someone 28 days to watch, right? So that means you fall behind 28 days, right? Every hour. Yeah. So it's like, it was, I remember I went to the Sistine Chapel once as a teenager, like, roughing it through Europe or whatever. And they were like, yeah, it'll take you 16 years to look at each painting in the Sistine Chapel. And like, that's what it reminded me of, like, for 1 minute, right? So it was like, oh my God, it's such a unfathomable, like, volume of content and volume of viewership to kind of wrap your mind around.
I think that, and the thing that I've kind of felt, that everyone in the Hollywood industry or content community, they tend to kind of go to the shiniest new toy of the week.
Mhm.
Um, and I think a lot of people kind of moved past YouTube as, they just took it for granted. And I think the whole purpose of this sort of conversation was that don't. It's massive. It's still the biggest, and you're missing your opportunity to commercialize it if you aren't thinking about it in commercial terms. Obviously, Matt. Just talking back for a second, going back a little bit to the content. We said clips and episodic content, but we forgot to talk about the fact that there's anything related to the topic. That means conversations, interviews, fans loading up, the toy collection they have from the latest Marvel movie. That's where it starts to become multidimensional in terms of what you're servicing to those communities. Did you want to talk about that? That doesn't it feel in your mind that some of the networks and studios might be giving up control to these fans that are clearly loading up all this kinds of great content, whereas it's all been there all along with the studios having access to all those great behind the scenes interviews, all the added value that would have come out of home entertainment or whatever.
Yeah, you're exactly right. I'll tell you a story that glorifies me. So in 2016, YouTube released a white paper. Google did, right? And they presented it at a conference called Rexis 16. Rexis is a conference about how recommendation algorithms are built, right? So it's like a conference for super nerds, the smartest people in the world, right? And this paper was broke down exactly how they built a YouTube algorithm, right? And so someone sent it to me. I took a look at it and was like, "Oh my God, this is amazing," right? And so I read it like 5 or 6 times and could barely understand it. So I read 5 or 6 times more, right? The information in it was just so unbelievably valuable to YouTube creators. So I wrote a breakdown of it. Right, I called it Reverse Engineering the YouTube Algorithm Part 2, published it on TubeFilter, right? Tens of thousands of reads. The next year at VidCon, or 6 months later at VidCon, YouTube publicly talks about the algorithm for the first time ever, or at least since they switched to watch time, right? And I knew all the panelists that were talking about it, and they did a great job of kind of like talking about the algorithm, how it works, and how the platform works. And I went up to him afterwards and I said, "Hey, it was really great. I'm really glad that you guys are talking about the algorithm again. Maybe I can stop." Right? The reason I was doing it is because no one else was, and I wanted to know those things, right? And so the panelist looked at me and goes, "We didn't know that Google had released that white paper until we read your report on it." Right? And I was like, "Really?" I figured they'd have to run that up the chain. And you're like, "Nope." He goes, "The only reason we're able to present this year is because you wrote that paper." And I was like, "Oh, that was really interesting." So we kept talking. He was like, "Yeah, we realized that if there's going to be a conversation about the algorithm, we want to have a voice in that." Right. And so like, I tell this long-winded, seemingly unrelated story to say like, yeah, if you own a brand that's potentially worth hundreds of millions, maybe billions of dollars in revenue, don't you want to have a say in that? Right. And that's everything, right? That's everything from, how the content's being interpreted to, how the toys are being received, how the merch is being received. And, working with creators on the platform that have audiences and helping to set that narrative can be extremely valuable.
Interesting. Well, I think it's interesting. The traditional models are gone, and I don't think it's changing. This is just an opinion. So rolling out the big conveyor belt to hit the biggest audience possible on opening weekend for a studio, that is definitely not in the foreseeable future. It's about people tentatively getting back to theaters. We can see what's happening overseas with the theater attendance, that people come back, they creep back in. So it's not about the opening weekend anymore. It's going to actually go back to the accumulation of how many people go over the first 6 weeks and how we release. And now things are going to go in premium VOD first. So as a result, how you market around that and how you try to commercialize the rest of that IP downstream is going to change as a result. So we're just about at the, I'm going to give one more shot for any other outstanding questions. I have one other question for Matt, but I think it's been fascinating this afternoon, this whole discussion. I think what's happened is people basically are missing out. I will let you know, if you do search Matt or Little Monster Media, there's a lot of extra stuff, a lot of things that Matt touched upon, you'll be able to find on a YouTube video, because if you want to learn more about thumbnails, certainly than I ever knew, a lot of that information's out there. But these are great tools. But more importantly, it's going to be a mindset shift, I think, for a lot of people to start to understand that this is another distribution platform and not something that the marketing team down the hall, no, they deal with that. That's their thing. And there are studios, there are networks looking at it differently. And I hope a lot of those who've been participating today will do so as well. So Matt, I guess the last thing, one chat question did come in. I can answer that for you later, Alex. So I'm going to ask Matt a more profound question. Matt, give us sort of crystal ball for us. What is, from today, what is sort of the 5 years from now? What does it look like for you with what's changing, not necessarily just with YouTube, but just sort of the distribution platform and how people consume great content?
I mean, that's a pretty loaded question. I'm not a huge future prediction guy. I'm the data analysis. Here's what happened. Let's try some more stuff.
What's the data telling you today that we can look at?
The data telling me today is TikTok sure as hell looks a lot like Vine. So the battle is over people's attention span. Right? If that attention span is streamed onto a set-top box through an iPhone or through a phone, an iPad, a gaming system, right? VR, hell, maybe books will make a comeback. Don't quote me on that. It's not going to happen, but my wife's an author, so buy books. It's over people's time and attention, and what captures people's attention from a distribution standpoint is great quality content. So if you can win with great quality content, then you're going to win. People loved Game of Thrones until that last season because it was phenomenal, right? And that last season, it was phenomenal except for the writing, right? It didn't have that last ingredient, right? You make content for the platform on which you're distributing, right? No one's buying a movie theater ticket to go, watch a puppeteer show anymore, right? Because puppeteer is not cutting edge, right? So, what's going to be cutting edge? What's going to become the new norm? VR looked hot there for a second, kind of went away. I got a feeling that's going to come back in a pretty big way. I think the latest round was, probably 7-8 years premature. And so I think 3-4 years from now, it could be real exciting. I think experiential type stuff. I think if COVID has taught many people things, it's the value of experiences, right? Before COVID hit, like all I wanted to do was hang out and watch Netflix. And now I'm like, I want to go to a museum. Open, please let me go to a museum, right? And before I would go to the museum, like when the folks were in town, I would take my kids, show them, the museum and stuff. But now it's like, just anything. I want to have experience again. So I think we'll see some experiential type stuff come up in terms of platforms. I know I've said this is the third time I say it, and it's a good note to end on. YouTube has a decade-long head start on the next biggest competitor as to what satisfies viewers for video, right? And they are backed by one of the 5 largest companies in the world. And YouTube's sole focus is video. You look at the other social platforms, they got a lot of focuses. They're not all focused on video. I think it's a juggernaut that there's no one, there isn't even a David yet to YouTube's Goliath. Like they haven't even been born yet. So, I mean, I'm biased, sure, but billions and billions of dollars of revenue and decades of data, and the smartest people in the damn world is a bit of a head start. So
Right.
like, it's never too late to invest and get started on the platform.
Great. Well, Matt, thanks again for your time today. This was terrific. I learned again, as I always do, talking to you. Thank you to the participants. You certainly can follow up with Matt with any other outstanding questions or thoughts you may have. And thank you, everybody. I think if you're part of the conference, there's supposed to be some kind of happy hour with pets, I believe. But you can look at the agenda for more information on that. Thanks, everybody. Stay healthy. Wear a mask. Talk soon. Bye-bye.
Thanks, Mark.